All right. Can we all see that? We're good? All right. Okay, let's get started. All right, yeah, today, thank y'all for having me. Thank y'all for coming here. I'm excited to tell y'all about the area. Okay, so we'll start a little bit about myself. So I've been the manager. Hold on just one second. Okay. Moving some of this around. Okay. So yeah, I've been the area manager at Orange Hammock since October 2020. That was about 5 months after the state actually purchased it. As Steve said, I worked at Babcock Ranch Preserve before that for 2 years as an RCW biologist, and I am one of the two staff members at the WMA. We have one other employee. He's a fish and wildlife technician named Brian. Let's actually talk about the area. We're about 5,800 acres. We're located in the southeastern portion of Sarasota County. You can see that I-75 there touches the southwest corner. We're right on the DeSoto County line. This is an interesting WMA because it's actually within the city limits of Northport. Northport is a massive municipality, and apparently, yeah, we're right there within it. And we are managed by FWC, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. We're the only managers on this property. So here's a map from our management plan that shows where Orange Hammock is in terms of other conservation lands in the area. Let me get my pointer out here. So right here, this is RV Griffin Reserve. This is managed by Southwest Florida Water Management District. And this is Longino, Louis Longino Preserve. So this is a conservation easement. This is on the north side of Orange Hammock. And then there's also some other ones that go down here, some properties y'all are familiar with, the Carlton, Myakka River State Park, and some other county lands. So this is a good little corridor that's in a very rapidly developing 2 or 3 counties. And Orange Hammock was a really crucial purchase to maintain this. And it was definitely a big win for this area. Let me turn this. All right, so the acquisition history of this property is pretty interesting. Um, so prior to 2000, this is known as the Kels Ranch. Well, Kelsey. I've heard both from people. It was around 9,000 acres. And in 2000, it was sold to an investment corporation called Glosson. And after that, they annexed it to the city in 2000 because they were readying it for development. Then it was passed to a different corporation, South Florida side. They sold it for 11.5 million. And then in 2005, just 2 years later, it was purchased by a West Palm Beach developer for $61.5 million in 2005. One of the height of the real estate market then. For reference, in 2020, it was purchased for 21 million. So they lost a lot of money on that one. So I found this a couple years back. This is actually what was planned for Orange Hammock. This is what could have been. They called it Isles of Athena. This was 15,000 homes and 4.2 million square feet of stores and businesses. Later, they reduced it to 13,000 homes. But, I mean, the county and the city were in talks to build a $30 million interchange right here, right off of 75 to get into this property. So they were very serious about it. But during that process, 2007, 2008, the recession got in the way and this development just completely failed. And after the development failed, then it was passed on to several other companies and just got bounced around. So throughout this whole process, this is a property that, and I'm sure some of you have ever been in the area know, like this was one that people wanted to purchase for years. At least a couple decades after it was sold. And in 2013, Southwest Florida Water Management District attempted to purchase it. I can't remember the details exactly what happened, but it just didn't go through. And in 2014, the property was added to the Myakka Ranchlands Florida Forever project. And so 6 years later, after a lot of deliberation, a lot of talking, a lot of hard work, it was purchased for $21 million in May of 2020. Um, because of some state rules and bureaucracy, this, that, and the other, I think the state could only offer them 19 million, a little bit more, and the owners were not budging. They wanted 21 or a little more, however much it was. So the Conservation Foundation of the Gulf Coast decided that they were going to help. They really, really wanted this property to be preserved. So they fundraised $1.5 million of essentially like stopgap funds to complete the acquisition. So, without their help, without that idea, this might have never been conserved. So it's always, big kudos to them. They're very instrumental in this. So about a year later, we opened to the public on July 1st, 2021. A little bit about the public access facilities we have here. Just for if you're visiting in the future, when you're there at our field trip, we're open to the public every day of the year. It's an hour and a half before sunrise, an hour and a half after sunset when you can legally go in. Vehicle access is restricted during non-hunt days. I'll show you here. This spot is called Parking Area 3 in the brochure, and there is like a gate sort of down here. So this restricts access to non-hunters so basically you can't take a vehicle past that point. But when we do our field trip, we're going to open that up and because it's guided, we'll go through the rest of the property. So I got 9 miles of trails accessible to hiking, biking, and horseback. You can see the 2 different colored trails we got there. Just a note for people who are going, we don't have any public access facilities of any kind. No vault toilet, no water, no electricity. So just a PSA there. This is a very underdeveloped property, which is a good thing, but hopefully as time goes on, we'll have a few more facilities to make it more accessible for public access. And a note on access to the property itself, and I think this was in an email, or I told Steve and I were talking about it. This is Toledo Blake Boulevard in Northport, and this is exit 179 on I-75. So you go north on 75, and then there's a sign. This is actually an easement road. So all through there is private lands. So there's signage down the road, and there's also an electric gate at the entrance. Press the green button, it will let you open during legal hours. So we've simplified it a lot, but sometimes people get turned around on their road. Just drive 3.5 miles straight and you will hit the WMA. And there's sometimes, especially with all this rain, there's a couple low spots in the road that can hold some water. We've done a lot of work to this road to make it better. But just a PSA, if you got friends, maybe you have someone with an SUV, you have a sedan, I would encourage people to get in something with a little higher clearance, especially now when we're getting all this rain that we need. And this easement road was a big challenge when we purchased this property. We really didn't know what we were going to do for access. People wanted us to go in from down here in the Yorkshire area. If you're familiar with Northport, there's all these roads that go right here that terminate against Orange Hammock, but there's a big canal here. So that's where we were encouraged by private landowners to go, but we were not able to do that. So we're using this easement road. We've done a lot of improvements, and we've worked out some legal agreements with landowners, and I think we've finally got it figured out. Okay, so let's talk about the stuff that we're all here for. So natural communities at Orange Hammock. This is a map that was created by Florida Natural Areas Inventory, if you're familiar. They did surveying in December of 2020. That was one of the first things that we did when we had staff there. You can see the table on the left. Those are the acreages and then percentages for different natural communities that we have, and then the graphic representation over there. Just to highlight a couple things. These are 2 pockets of dry prairie, which is very interesting for this area. high profile, and we'll talk about that in a second. And just lots of wetlands scattered through here. And then a slough system and another slough system. This is a very wet property. Lots of mesic flatwoods. Should be noted that even though this property was passed around so much and like, you know, I don't want to say neglected, but there were the 20-year period was, I think, pretty hard on it. Only 5% of the property is developed or messed with at all. There are some artificial ponds, clearings, and a few small developed areas, but it's pretty amazing just seeing how ranchland goes that there was no improved pasture or small farm fields or anything put in on this property. So this property is, I heard it described as pristine, and yeah, the ground cover is definitely there. We need to put fire on the ground, and we'll talk about that soon. Our fire maintained areas are predominantly mesic flatwoods, and I talked about the dry prairie we have on the east side. And we'll talk more about some specifics of the natural communities. So wetlands, yeah, high percentage of the property, 31% of the acreage is either open water or a wetland community. Our wetland communities include basin and depression marshes, which are pretty similar. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have the two slough systems, Alderman Slough, which is also called Big Slough Canal, and Orange Hammock Slough. So let me go back real quick. This is Alderman Slough, or Big Slough Canal, and then this is Orange Hammock Slough, this system. Alderman Slough has been channelized. That was done in the 50s. So it's more of a big canal, and then it goes right into Northport. It keeps going that way. Orange Hammock Slough is more intact. There's some minor ditching between these lobes, but this is in good shape besides some invasive grasses. And we're looking at hydrologic restoration for that area. It's a high priority for us right now. And I think one of the reasons why maybe this property evaded development for so long is that the access within it is quite poor, and it just gets so wet. This place gets very, very wet. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about the dry prairie. We have about 450 acres of it. I'm sure a lot of y'all are familiar with dry prairie if you've been to Myakka State Park or any other areas here, or Kissimmee Prairie State Park. They've got great examples of that. We don't have quite that much, 450 acres, but we can confirm via satellite imagery from the early 40s and before that this area was essentially treeless. And frequent fire is going to be very important for this. As you can see on this picture, we got some little pines coming in, and they come in pretty quick, especially if there's a seed source. And we were looking to get rid of those pines. We want this to be just palmetto prairie. And this is a high priority for restoration and maintenance for us. And we actually burned this area at the beginning of December. So hopefully we got a lot of mortality on these pines. That's something we're going to work on this year. So other uplands, our other upland communities are mainly mesic flatwoods and mesic hammock. Most of the hammocks are around our marshes. And even though they're described as upland, as you're all aware, I'm sure, these can become very, very wet. So standing water is very common in the flatwoods during the rainy season. We have no true xeric communities on Orange Hammock. I get asked sometimes about scrub jays and this, that, and the other because we're kind of in near that zone where there are some. And unfortunately, the answer is no. The only spot that's even sort of dry is on the south side, and I guess the scrubbiest plant that can handle it in there is a little bit of sand live oak. And speaking of the pines, the overstore in the flatwoods is either lacking or very young. And the reason for that is the property was clear cut in 2009, which I will talk about in the next slide. So here is aerial imagery when they were doing the cut or had finished the cut, one of the two. They started at the end of 2009 and they cut into 2010. You see all these traces, these logging traces, and where they were putting their logs and hauling them. This was done presumably to recoup some financial costs So rather than do an ecological thinning or something like that, they just high graded or essentially cut everything. So I've never seen any pictures, and I don't know if I want to, but I know that there were some really, really big pines there. So it hurts to see that, but we're going to move forward and sort of regrow our pines, so to speak. But in terms of other uses that we've had here, it's hard to find specific info on the ranch. We're actually doing a cultural resource assessment right now, and they dig into some of the history of that for us. So hopefully we'll get some interesting commentary on that in the next few months. But from what I could find, there's confirmed cattle ranching, probably very, very early. It's probably the first thing this place was used for. I'm assuming that a lot of it was logged for the first cuts when the first settlers got here. And then after that, we can find Hurdy pot shards. So they were using this for turpentining at some point as well. Actually quite common throughout the flatwoods. Cattle ranching continued up until the acquisition of the property. Currently, there's a few wild cows in here, but we don't have a cow lease on this property anymore. So the only spots that were never logged in 2009 is this area right here, and this area right here. It never quite got there. So there is a stand of pretty mature pines here, South Florida slash, and also some longleaf. There's some longleaf in here as well, in some of the drier spots. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get over here to see those. Our field trip will probably be some places up in here and along this corridor right here. As I mentioned earlier, there are some hydrologic alterations done to this, the ditching in Orange Hammock Slough and then Alderman Slough being channelized. There were hunting leases and upland game or upland bird hunts. I believe they would release quail and release pheasant, and they ran some deer hunting leases out of this place in the 2010s, and I'm assuming before that as well. But overall, my impression is the property was probably well managed pre-2000. Afterwards, because it got passed through so many hands, and because I think the pressure of development and this isn't going to be around here forever sort of set in on people, I don't think that it was taken care of as much as it was before that. Previous landowners and lessees did burn though. It's just the intervals weren't there. They weren't at those 2, 3, 4 year that we're looking for. But definitely this area looks as nice as it does because there was a history of good management on here. It's just it kind of fell off in the last couple decades. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but the only thing that was done development-wise was create this road. It's a nice wide road and it's built up about to here, which is good for us, and we've been able to improve it, and it provides good access. Okay, so we'll get into our current management, what we're doing at the management area, and I'll talk about each one of these in more detail. We got mechanical treatments going on, chemical herbicide treatments, prescribed fire, of course, infrastructure improvements, hunting, as we've talked about, and we're doing surveys and monitoring for different threatened and endangered species. Okay, let's talk about our most valuable tool, which is prescribed fire. And it is the safest, most cost-effective management tool to maintain Florida's natural communities. There's some activities that we can do to simulate certain aspects of burning, but ultimately there is no replacement for fire. We need to burn. Florida's upland, these fire-maintained communities need fire. Mechanical treatments like chopping and mulching, like I said, they can simulate it. But prescribed fire reduces biomass present in the area. Mowing or mulching, that's just changing how the biomass is distributed. It's just putting it on the ground. It's making it, not tall. It's just putting it on the ground. And if mechanical treatments don't remove the undesirable vegetation, it is not replacing fire. So I just like to, I know you were all, I'm sure, aware of fire's beneficial properties, but I like to stress this when I talk to people about fire, just how important it is. It's not just something that we do, it's something that needs to happen. And the more development occurs and the more difficult it becomes to burn, I feel like we need to stress this. And since we're beginning our burn program in February 2022, we have burned a third of the property, which is about 1,900 acres. And then we had about a 200-acre wildfire in May. So a little bit more acreage off of that as well. So we're going to do our first reburn this year. We're going to burn 500 acres, the stuff that we burned in 2022. So I'm excited about that. Okay, so a little bit about seasonality, interesting aspect of burning in Florida. So depending on the site conditions, it's possible to burn all year round in Peninsular Florida. Really, the main thing to look at, besides all the other things in your prescription for burning and where you're at, et cetera, is it too wet or is it too dry, right? But not all burns are created equal. Generally, we're going to have a better response from a growing season burn floristically. So that's going to be from April to September. But within that, there's going to be some more nuance, aka it's known as transition season burning, which mimics the natural fire cycle in Florida. And this was lightning started fires that naturally went through the landscape when it was its driest, when the thunderstorms were beginning, right? And this is really the best time to burn. If you've seen a growing season, or if you've seen a growing season burn versus a dormant season burn, you know that they look slightly different. And if you see a transition season burn, then you really know. You're going to have a great response from wiregrass. Lots of the other wildflowers that we love, they really respond well to that. You know, when you see one, it feels right. It looks better. You know, it really wants it. The unfortunate part about that is it is also the most challenging time of the year to burn because we're at our driest, the thunderstorms are starting. It can kind of get hairy out there. So a lot of times we're in May, it might feel like we really need to burn, but we might not even be able to unless we get a rain a few days before. So in an ideal world, we would burn when we were supposed to, which is April to July. But we don't live in an ideal world, and we only have so much staff time. And you know, a lot of these properties are beside places where we can't put smoke on. So we kind of have to choose based on the unit, based on the condition of it, what time of the year we're going to burn. And dormant season burns, which is what we're doing now, they keep an area in rotation, so to speak, and they're going to keep the fuels lower. So you're not going to get the ideal floristic response that you would get from a growing season or transition season fire, but it's still important to keep your areas in rotation. If you can't burn a place in April, you can't just keep deferring it over and over. Then you're gonna run into some fuels issues. In my opinion, burn if you can, but don't expect the same results from every burn. Save your best areas for transition season fires, but also remember that it's important to keep the interval on those communities. So here is some before and afters, which we all like. So the top is some mesic flatwoods. This was probably 9 to 10 years since fire, from what I could tell. A lot of that vegetation is 6 to 8 feet tall. So with the help of some mechanical treatments along the edges, and some well-timed fire, this was in June. The results on the bottom speak for themselves. I mean, it was a pretty drastic response for just one fire. So, and after this, those fuels are much more manageable. So we'll be able to apply fire to this safely, and it won't be nearly as stressful, and we won't have to continue doing mechanical treatments because it's staying in rotation. Okay, so this is time for the part of the presentation where we show some big scary machines that help us do management, but I promise they're very useful for us and we would not be burning without them. They have been completely instrumental in allowing us to get back into a burning rotation. So these are large wheeled drum mulchers. People call them shredders or call them macerators as well. And like I said, we're going to use these when we have unsafe fuels along our burn units, our fire breaks, etc. Normally, we're going to mulch in around 20 to 30 feet, depending on the fuels. And these mulchers are going to macerate and shred the vegetation and leave a layer of mulch on the ground. And depending on when you do it and when you burn after, sometimes it burns really well, sometimes it doesn't burn. But the idea is to just take that fuel, put it on the ground so it's safer and burn it there. Fire is always included in these mechanical treatments. We need to burn after that. They're, like I said, they're not a replacement for it. But yeah, mulching along these fire breaks and burn units is going to reduce those fuel heights and allow us to burn them safely. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, disturbance, right? You're putting a machine through the woods, it's going to be crushing vegetation, it's going to be causing ruts, etc. But with this equipment, especially with wheeled equipment versus tracks, they're pretty good about reducing disturbance. So an area that this mulcher is going to go through and mulch along it, it's really just going to look like it's mowed, like someone went through there on a tractor. There's not going to be any ruts. There's going to be very, very little soil disturbance. And even if you misfire and it's just coming back up, it looks quite good. You're going to have a really great response from wildflowers. A lot of these edges that we've been mulching, several Carpenter species, they're going to come up more easily in that than they would in the flatwoods right beside it that's choked up with higher palmetto. And here's something to illustrate what that looks like. So these are two different burn units. Both units were mulched 20 feet in. The left one was burned in June of last year. And after we did that, it allowed us to safely burn the one to the right, which is just mulched here. We burned that 6 months later. And that way we're able to use our winds to our advantage to where, if we're throwing embers from here onto this, if this is already burned, it's much, much easier to burn from this one. So you kind of set up your burn units like that. So mulched in, burn, mulched in, and then this was burned later. I just want to note, this vegetation, this is 6 to 8 feet high, and it was 6 to 8 feet high right here on both sides. So those mulchers really, really, that mechanical treatment really enables us to get back out there and start burning. And when we burn this again, it's not going to need any treatment. We'll be able to burn along it just like normal. Okay, so I know this is a controversial management tool to some. Roller chopping, I'm sure several of you are familiar with this, but I want to reiterate that roller chopping is for restoration. So these are not for our pristine communities that are in a burn rotation. So this is the typical chopper setup that we're going to use, and I'll talk about that. This is not my picture, but this is very similar to what we've used before. So this implement on the back was what is dragging. These are also called pasture aerators. So unlike a straight blade chopper, which I don't have a picture of, but a straight blade chopper is just it'd be a very large blade that goes across the back and they're in lines like that. This is more, it's got that helix to it, small individual blades that are going to do the cutting. So the reason we're using this is areas that have heavy palmetto. It's going to shade out a lot of other wildflowers, and especially if it hasn't burned in, we'll say 10, 15, 20 years, that palmetto is going to start being arborescent, right? It's going to start going up. So we use chopping to reduce not only the height of palmetto, saw palmetto, but also the density. So we're looking to just reduce the presence and allow there to be some more gaps in our understory and our ground cover. So it's not just full palmetto coverage. So we are not using these again to eliminate all palmetto. This is just a reduction in density. If we were to reduce or completely get rid of all the palmetto, that would be land clearing, which is not what we're doing. But these individual blades on this chopper, they're smaller cuts and they're not going to completely slice and sever a palmetto or the clump of palmettos. to completely eliminate them. So we find that this more is going to cut some. It's also going to compress the fuels. And I'll show you all some pictures. The results can be quite good. But as with any other mechanical treatment, these, if they're not used correctly, can drastically alter the community. It's important to only go over the chopped area once. You need to reiterate to your operators, if you go over it, that's it. We're not going to go over it multiple times. Then you're really going to start hurting things. And after you do this, you really have to be vigilant about monitoring for invasives. Kogan grass especially is going to love this. When there's sort of a release like this and other plants around it are dying, it's going to spread very quickly. So you need to get in there. You need to do your monitoring. You need to start treating it immediately. We found that if you don't, then you can end up with more of a problem. Sure, you don't have that much palmetto, but now 10% of your cover is Kogan grass. Here's some before and afters of an area that we chopped. Before is on top. I think this was 9 months later. These are the same spots. And just with the chop, the pasture aerator, single pass, we've drastically compressed these fuels and done a reduction in saw palmetto density and some other plants as well. And we have had to go in here and spray. It released Kogan grass, and you just gotta be vigilant. You can't expect everything to be okay after you do that chop. And we will burn this year. Here's that same spot, just along the fire break that cuts it off. So this area that we chopped is near I-75, so we really wanted to reduce our fuels there just for smoke reasons. But the area on the left that's untreated and unburned, that's a 10-year since fire rough. And then the spot on the right looked exactly like that before it was chopped. So just with that, it's a pretty drastic alteration in a good way. So speaking of invasives, here's a few common invasive species that we have in the area, unfortunately. We've all been around, been to different public and private lands in Florida, and know that non-native invasive plants are found not only like in marginal areas, but in some of our highest quality natural areas and in some extremely remote areas. A lot of these are here to stay, unfortunately, and they're very, very difficult to eradicate on a property. These are some of our worst offenders, especially torpedo grass, Panicum repens up there. That's a very aggressive one in wetlands. So how do we control these? The way we control them is with chemical treatments. These are a crucial tool in controlling non-native invasive species. In many cases, it is the only method that can actually control them. It's cost effective. It kills the plants down to the roots if you apply it correctly. An example is going to be Kogan grass. If any of you have ever tried to eradicate it in your yard, or maybe you've done it on natural lands, you cannot control it by hand. You cannot pull it by hand. You cannot mow it. You cannot control it with fire. It loves fire and actually kills other plants around it. And there's no biocontrols that we have or have developed or that we've found yet. So really the only tool in our toolbox is chemical herbicide or going to be soil disturbance, like disking with a disc harrow on a tractor. In a natural area, we can't do that. We're trying to preserve the ground cover around it. We're not trying to turn it into a farm field. So if you get Kogan grass in a pasture, then you can use a disc harrow. You can go over it several times. And if you keep doing that, you will reduce the density of the rhizomes and you can eradicate it. But here, we're in a natural spot. The only tool we have that is worth its salt is going to be chemical herbicide. And even after you spray it once, it's going to require several times coming back and respraying that same patch. So it's very essential for us if we do treat a patch here, like here in this picture, we're coming back here for the next 2 years at least. And we're going to reapply herbicide to try and gradually reduce how much of that plant is there. And then normally after 2 to 3 years, you can begin to eradicate it. So we utilize our area staff, me and my technician, Brian. We also utilize contractors, and they're going to actually systematically traverse the property as sort of a standardized interval, and they're going to look and treat for every species that you've told them. So Brazilian pepper, Kogan grass, climbing fern, Lygodium, and it's very thorough. It's very expensive too, but we will target certain units and we'll sort of keep them in rotation with these treatments, and it's been very good for us. Here's a spot that a contractor sprayed. That's all Kogan grass on the left. Um, After sprayed, then we were able to mulch a little bit in there because there was a bunch of hurricane debris. But just a little before and after of how drastic it can look when the Kogan grass is actually gone. And then public use hunting. So we have several hunts throughout the year, as the name implies, wildlife management area. So we have 6 different seasons, including archery, gun, uh, small game, and a few others. This is going to be more of a restricted harvest area. Most hunts allow 15 permits total, and that's the highest. So for a little context, those of you not familiar, people who have a hunting license can apply for quota permits. Not everyone's given them. You sort of draw them, and then once you get one, say if I got Orange Hammock archery, then I would be one of 15 for a certain weekend that I could go hunt there, and I could bring one other hunter with me. So the max number of people that could be in there hunting at one time is 30, and it's rarely that. Normally, with the highest, it would be 15 to 20. So there's not a lot of pressure on these wildlife in here, and it's a pretty high quality hunting area, just from the feedback that we've gotten from hunters. It's 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 a really sort of like a hidden gem here for the guys, and once they start hunting here, they really enjoy it. Um, so it's more eyes and ears for us really because they're invested in the property. And here's 3 guys that took some white-tailed deer this year, and that's really what it's popular for, is for white-tailed deer. So there will be no hunts going on. We were discussing this earlier. There's no hunts going on when we're doing the field trip. But I would encourage people, if they come here on different days, to read the brochure and just know when the hunt weekends are. I would not recommend walking around in the woods when there's a hunt going on. If you absolutely have to, put on some orange, but I wouldn't recommend it. So as I mentioned earlier, we're doing some surveys and monitoring on this property. Um, Opportunistic observations, when we see a carrick arrow, we see a bald eagle, go for tortoise, we're entering that into a database. Um, we have camera traps out and trail cameras as well. So this box that's shown here in the bottom left, that's for small mammals. So we'll bait that, and you put a camera inside, you can actually get pictures of small mammals. Sometimes birds will go in there. That's been interesting. The picture on the right, that's a couple of employees at the WC that do our inventory monitoring for different species and also for bonneted bats. If you're familiar with bonneted bats, Southwest Florida has several areas with healthy populations. It's a federally endangered bat that's endemic to Florida, the southern half of Florida. A property next to us has detected bonneted bats, so we've been doing some audio surveys where you put out these like passive microphones. You can get different species, and using software, you can figure out what species of bats you have. We haven't detected bonneted bats yet, but I know it's only a matter of time. I think they use this property for foraging. They'll fly many, many miles on one night to forage. So that doesn't necessarily mean they're here nesting, but I'm sure that they're utilizing it off and on for foraging. We do have tricolored bats though, and if you follow any of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife stuff, then you know that tricolored bats are being listed soon. They're going to be federally endangered, I believe. So I guess we have one endangered bat already, just not the bonneteds. So upcoming surveys that we're going to do, we got Bachman sparrow surveys coming up this spring, which will be exciting. Now that we've started burning. I've only heard Bachman sparrows a couple times on the property because the fuels have been so high. I think now that we've started burning, I think we're going to see a good response from those grassland birds. So that'll be fun. And here's some trail cam pictures because why not? It's cool. There's coyote, bobcat, wild pig, and white-tailed buck there. Really, I have these trail cams up well, to see what other wildlife we have moving through, but I'm really hoping one of these days to catch that transitory panther or bear that moves through the area. Bears are very infrequent in this area of Southwest Florida. I think occasionally they'll go to Northport. Panthers are even more rare. But as we were talking about earlier, sort of that conservation corridor, and that was one of the ideas is to have natural lands there for these large mammals that need that to disperse and move through. They hold very, very large territories. A few more wildlife pictures. Gopher tortoise up there. We've got a small population in the area. Like I said, there's not very many dry spots, but they're persisting in some areas, just not everywhere that you would find like on the ridge or something. And here's a couple small mammal species that we got in those boxes. That's cool. It's a deer mouse and then a cotton rat, the top left. Okay, so moving on to plants finally. Well, I guess we talked about invasive plants, but our native ones. So here's a few of the notable threatened and endangered plants. I think a lot of these are state listed stuff, but these have been documented on the property. Calopogon multiflorus. Normally after we burn, we'll see some of those. Lots of butterfly orchids in the hammocks, pine lilies. We might see some yellow butterwort when they're out there, the pinguiculas on Saturday. And actually, fairly interesting, but we've got quite a few spots where I've found wild populations of coontie, which is very exciting to see. I've never seen those. I've worked on several conservation properties in Florida. I've never seen them in the wild. But we've got several spots where we've got fairly robust populations of coontie. And here are some other documented plants, just that we've found 190 different species. There's still many more out there that need to be, cataloged, checked off the list. Here's a few that I've seen the last year or so, and we've detected 19 different non-native species. So for those of you that like to find cool stuff, here's some potential species that I think could be out there. This is from FWC, or the state's list of plants of importance. I think it was, I can't remember exactly what the list was called, but Asimina pochella there is yellowed out. I think that one, federally endangered plant. I don't know if anyone here is familiar or knows a lot about it, but I think orange hammock stands a good chance at having some of it on there. So I'm always keeping my eye out for that one. A few of these we could definitely find, like a orthochyllus, I think is for sure out there. I've never seen one. A few of these others might be a stretch. I don't think we're ever going to find Matalia there, or Platanthera, but we might. So if you know a lot about beautiful pawpaw, shoot me an email. Okay, and I guess I'll save the worst for last, but this is a challenge that's developing next door. And I know that this is happening all over Manatee and Sarasota County, all over the state of Florida in general, this development. This is a planned development called Toledo Village. I think now it's called Star Farms. This is about 3,600 homes, and it's right up against our western boundary here, right here. So this has been in the works for years and years and years, and now it's finally, they're getting some momentum, getting some steam, and I think this one's going to happen. But this will make burning more difficult, especially on the west side of the WMA, but not impossible. And it will just place much more of a user burden on the area, which is, again, not necessarily a bad thing. But it will change the dynamics of this area. So it's something we're watching very closely. Okay, so I get asked about Hurricane Ian quite often, so I had this for a different presentation, so I figured I'd just leave it in and we can talk about a little bit. I think we're all from the area, so we know how bad it was. But it was a crazy amount of water in a very, very limited amount of time. So here was a 2-day rainfall estimate from uh Klystron. Yeah, but I can't remember where I found this. But according to this, over 2 days, we got 16 to 19 inches in our area. But according to this map produced by Sarasota County, they estimated between 22 to 24 inches in 24 hours. Massive amount of rain. So on this slide, you can see this is a aerial from November 2021. You can see you can see brown still here in these wetlands. Canals are barely visible. There's some open water spots, how it's supposed to look. This is your typical look we're going for. And then this was taken one day after Ian's landfall. So this is one day after. You can barely see any brown in any of the wetlands at all. You can see how swollen all these canals. This is Northport. And this is Yorkshire. Look at all this water that's being held in this area. Now, even RV Griffin over here is not that wet. Not sure why. But just gotta think, with all this being developed, it's gonna be homes. This is holding a massive amount of water too. For this to be developed, this is a big push on why they wanted this area. It holds a lot of rainwater and water that goes to the potable water sources. It's purified for Northport. But there was bad flooding in this area. So I thought this is interesting to bring up, that if this wasn't here, how much worse it would have been. And here's the winds. Florida Forest Service produced this map. So the WMA is sort of right on the edge of where the severe wind swath was. So I'd estimate probably we had gusts around 90 to 100 in that area. So pretty bad. Not quite as bad as Punta Gorda or down there in Fort Myers, but we got some severe winds for sure. Here's just a couple pictures, kind of like what the flatwoods looked like on the left. Lots of trees leaned over, bent trees, snap trees. Not many complete windfalls, like the whole root ball, popping out and it falling down. I think that's really just because we just don't have a lot of mature pines. I think as they get heavier and older, I think some of them tend to do that. But these young ones were able to bend and sort of go with the wind, and a lot of them are dying, but still. And then we had tons of trails that just had oaks in them like that. It was a long cleanup process. And I think the most eerie thing really was after getting there 10 days later, just all the hammocks are defoliated and you can just see through them. And it's very bizarre. You can see all these wetlands that you never see. And then you look inside of those hammocks, and I never thought I'd see that many cabbage palms down, or just massive live oaks. Just that soil saturation and all those high winds. We lost a lot of really beautiful oaks, along with the pines. And yeah, here's a hammock. Just how much was down in them. This one's pretty open, and there's some areas that were worse than this for sure. And just the flooding at the top right, that's where the parking area is, where we'll meet for the field trip. And that was after we were able to get in there. So that was much, much higher the day after the hurricane. Okay, I think that'll wrap it up for me. I guess we're doing questions, but here's my work cell and my email. If anyone has any questions, comments, anything about the property, feel free to call me, feel free to email me. I'm always down to help and tell people about the area. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Hunter. That was a great presentation. And in addition to now, I mean, people are coming on your walk who'll be able to pepper you with questions the whole time. I sort of wondered, as I was seeing all those plants that you're wanting to see there, whether you should enlist us to be trying to track, trying to pick,
Yeah,
spot some of those guys for you.
I can. Do I need to? Well, yeah, this will be on YouTube. So if anyone wants to look at that list, and I kind of curated it. I know, there's stuff obviously that's like scrubby and things like that that I left off. I think those are we have a good chance of finding some of those species there.
Yeah,
So.
that'd be great. We do have a few minutes. If anybody had a question that they wanted to ask Hunter, now. I don't know, if Allison, if there's a way or
Yeah,
people
they
ask
can put it in
questions
the
in the chat.
chat. They can put it on the chat, or they can unmute themselves and start their video and chime in. We might be able to run this like a town hall.
Yeah. Maybe people.
Come on, don't be shy, folks.
Hunter, how many acres is Orange Hammock? Or sorry, how many acres is it?
It's about 5,800 acres.
Looks like quite a fire there is here. This is something. Was this on the property, the fire that we're looking at there? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, this was in June, I believe. Yeah, it was a good day. I think we
Yeah.
burned about 400 acres.
Are you getting a lot of response from the community when you do a fire like that? Do they end up your phones ringing off the hook, or what, or do you go out and educate a lot beforehand?
Well, we don't really have any people like right along there. So, like south of us, people don't really live there. It's a weird area of Northport. And then west of us, once that development goes in, we're gonna have a lot of calls. But generally, forestry might be the one that calls me, and they're like, "We've got reports of smoke. Is it just you?" And it almost always is just us.
Yeah.
So, and we try and send our smoke northeast or north, so it stays out of Northport and it goes over those ranch lands and settles out there rather than, you know, out on people's homes. Um, but generally, no, I haven't run into any issues. Even being close to the interstate, it's all been good.
I took a screenshot when you were speaking of the potential species, and I dropped a copy of it into the chat. So if anybody wants it, now's the time to grab it, and it shows the list of species.
Oh, cool. Great.
I also wondered about in the reptile category, have you seen a lot of snakes?
So in terms of the neat things, not a lot. I've seen, I think maybe one diamondback, and then sort of your typical species. There was a report of an indigo from a survey in like the early 2000s, but I'm skeptical of that one. Just I don't know. We really don't have those xeric communities. I mean, I guess it's possible they're persisting near one of those canals and using that in the wet areas. But like finding like a pygmy rattlesnake would be interesting, and then I don't think we would get pine snakes.
So indigo are really only xeric, not because I would think like just dry prairie in general,
I think indigos use a large variety of habitats, but I think they kind of need that refuge, those burrows. I worked, let me think. Well, I've never even seen one, and I've worked at several areas with them. I think they're just difficult to find.
And you aren't having a problem with the boas?
No, we don't have any. Well, I take that back. I think there actually is a population of pythons in Rotunda now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I heard about that recently from one of my colleagues. It's in the invasive what is it, section. But we don't have any pythons here yet, I guess.
Yeah. Is good news.
Yeah. And no tegus that we haven't seen any tegus, but those are around. And once they get there, they can establish themselves pretty quickly.
So when you're looking at the property, sort of your long-term, I don't know, timeline, goal, vision, all of that. I mean, we're sort of out of time here for that, but how are you looking at that?
So we have a 10-year management plan that really kind of specifies all of our goals. So I could say like the next 10 years, we will want to burn more and probably burn around 15 to 2,000 acres a year. Like keep the property in like a 3-year rotation, essentially. And then we're hoping to do some hydrologic restoration, build out our infrastructure a little bit more where we have some facilities over there to, keep equipment. And sort of just hopefully, outreach and flesh out the area enough to where we have sort of like a dedicated base of people that use the area besides hunters. So,
We did have a question in the chat. Are the 9 miles of trails continuous or are they separate, which adds up to 9 miles?
yes, so there's a 1.5 mile loop, and then the other trail is 7.5 miles. But it has sort of like a main, I think like 6 or 5 mile loop, and then on the other side of the road, there's about 2 more miles, which is a different loop. So if you're looking for a long hike, then you could do that. I think that's 7.5 miles.
Can you do just 5? The way you're describing it, it sounds like maybe you could do 5 and 2 if you.
Yes, you could. I can go back. Well,
Okay.
maybe not.
Are you looking to have more public use, or are you really looking to kind of keep that at a pretty low level?
No, I mean we're looking to have people use the area. I can't remember. I don't know if we have a sort of a discrete goal for how many per day. I think there's estimates on like what the user base should be. But yeah, I mean we're open to people coming in and enjoying the area for sure. But yeah, here's the I think this one's maybe 4 or 5 miles on this right. So if you started here and you did this, then that would be 7.5 miles.
Another question came in. What is the herbicide that you use?
We use several different ones. It just depends on the plant. So I know a big one in the news is Roundup, glyphosate. And glyphosate is a very effective all-purpose herbicide that we will use for certain species. Like if we spray Cogan grass, we might use that and then a different herbicide mixed with it that has more soil activity. And then for like Brazilian pepper, we'll use depending on where it's at, what it's in, and how we're treating it, some of the triclopyr formulations. We'll use those. There's a lot, but there's a lot of tools in our toolbox for herbicide.
All right. Well, thank you.
Oh, well, somebody asked, and this is a good thing to end on, for anybody coming on Saturday, I'm seeing a question asking about a day use fee. So there's certainly no charge for when we go, but is there any other charge if somebody's going?
No day
They
use
say
fee.
it's quite wet getting there and it's not good for lower profile vehicles, and I don't know if I want to like.
That's what I would recommend. If you could carpool with someone that has an SUV, that's what I would recommend. There's just a couple spots on that easement road where it's gotten sort of wallowed out and it holds some water.
Maybe
if
on
we
the
get-
meetup, some people who have SUVs and are willing to take riders with them could chime in on the comments on the meetup,
Yeah.
and then we can organize ourselves perhaps, driving, meeting at a particular exit or something like that, and riding from there.
Good idea.
And
I could even drive, carpool with somebody to the entrance, and then at the entrance getting somebody else's vehicle there.
Right, that's what that's what I was gonna say. I'd probably drive. So we're going through 3 parking areas, is that right?
so those parking areas are more suggestions. You can park, that road is quite wide. So
Okay.
if you want to
But
go
we're-
off on your own, you can park on the side of the road. It's no
But we're gonna meet with you where at the farther end one?
right here. Sorry, get the pointer out right here. It's right when you come into the
Oh,
parking.
you're gonna meet us there. Okay, great.
And is
And
that
so
accessible, or is it dirt road before that going to be a problem?
really the road is really solid. There's just a couple spots that hold some water right now.
Okay,
So
so that we could possibly come in McCall Ranch and then get in other people's cars there.
yeah. Once we get to that first parking area and we like have our get together, we can. I would encourage everyone to carpool up more. But getting to that spot, like if you have a sedan, it would be better if you could get with someone with an SUV to get into the property. That's what I would recommend. But you could probably get through there too. You're just gonna go through a bit of water in one spot. So
And
Well,
people
great.
could
Well-
park at Walton Ranch and then drive back south to the entrance from Toledo Blade on Tropicare Extension there to the McCall Ranch Road.
oh yeah, Chris, aren't you? You're over there, right? Yeah,
Yes.
that's right. I
Yeah.
recognize your name. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, we'll talk more on Saturday. I'll be there.
Cool. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thanks again, Hunter. That was terrific. And we look forward to seeing you on Saturday.
Well, great. Thanks for having me.
And hopefully it won't be raining.
Hopefully not. It will be wet. Yes. So if you're coming on Saturday, bring some mud boots for sure.
And a change of socks for afterwards.
Thank you, son.
Absolutely.
And a sandwich, and a sandwich.
A sandwich and a drink. All right.
Okay, that's it.
Much, everybody. It's been a great meeting. I'll have this up on YouTube in a few days.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Night, everyone.
Night.
Night.